want to begin here with your chart, Old Testament kings and prophets. You'll be getting that out. We've got 4 kings that are prominent here in the last days of Judah and Jerusalem. Remember, we looked last week at the first half of Jeremiah's book, which deals basically with his manifold predictions of activity that's going to shortly come upon Judah and Jerusalem. And here in I believe we stopped at chapter 25, where we have a first reference to the specific 70-year period. And for the most part, in the second part of his book, we've got more prophecies of their fall. Jeremiah doesn't have his chapters from 1 through 52 in chronological order. So don't think like that and don't study the book like that. Study the book in light of these particular kings. That's why I'm going to mention these, because they are the ones who will help you correctly date the book. Only problem is sometimes they're called by different names. Now, on the bottom left-hand portion of your chart, we've got 4 kings mentioned there. Jehoahaz. Now, he only reigns for, I believe, 3-month period, just a short period. He's the son of Josiah. Jeremiah's ministry had begun right about the middle of the period of King Josiah, who was a good king, by the way. We're going to look and see what he did wrong that got himself killed in battle here towards the end of his life, the middle of Jeremiah's period of prophecy. The second king is Jehoiakim, I-M ending. The third one who only rules or reigns for a year is Jehoiakim, I-N ending. And then the last king of Judah, the last one of Israel had been Hosea. The last one of Judah is Zedekiah. Now, each one of these 4 kings, this is the way you need to study, especially your book of Jeremiah, since he's dealing throughout with the period of these various kings. He's dating his prophecies on the basis of these kings. And you might have, for example, chapter 29. This is just for an example. I don't know who he's talking to, but chapter 29 may be, thus saith the Lord to Zedekiah. And then chapter 37, that was 29, chapter 37 may be to Jehoiakim. And then chapter 39 may be to Jehoahaz. So you're going just backwards chronologically. So he doesn't have his lined up this way. There's one king's name that we're going to change in the book as far as it's just a wrong mentioning there. Let me give you the other name of these kings and where it appears. Several of these appear with a changed name right here in Jeremiah. Not all of them do. Jehoahaz, first of all. Jeremiah 22, verses 10 through 12. We're past 22, but we'll turn back there and look at that. He's called Shallum. U-M, Shallum. What you need to remember about Shallum is he is the first king from Judah to die in exile. Not Babylonian exile, though. Where is he taken? He's taken down to Egypt by Pharaoh Necho and dies in Egypt. And he's the first king of Judah to die in exile or to die in captivity. Jeremiah 22, verses 10 through 12. So right away, if you see where Jehoahaz is, or Shallum, on your chart, and we're going to stay with these dates are correct here for your king, 609. So when you turn to Jeremiah 22, verse 10, now you have to know something else, that he has been taken down to Egypt by Pharaoh Necho. But in verse 10, weep ye not for the dead, neither bemoan him. He's talking about Shallum here. But weep sore for him that goeth away, for he shall return no more, nor see his native country. For thus saith the Lord concerning Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, which reigned instead of Josiah his father, which went forth out of this place. This is the word of the Lord concerning him. He shall not return thither any more, but he shall die in the place whither they have led him captive, and shall see this land no more. Now we'll look at where this specifically says that he goes by the hand of Pharaoh Necho to Egypt in a moment. Notice, however, he's called Shallum. So if you don't know that that's another name for Jehoahaz, you wouldn't be able to date Jeremiah 22 and find out, well, exactly when is this taking place. Now, the second king there, Jehoiakim, is also known as Eliakim. E-L-I-A-K-I-M. Eliakim. 2 Kings 23 and verse 34. We're not going to turn to that passage until a few moments. Now he happens to also be a son of Josiah, which makes him a brother with Shallum, or with Jehoahaz. Then the third king that's of note or importance with a very short one-year reign, who is the son of Jehoiakim, is Jehoiakim. He's unique in that he's referred to in Jeremiah by two different names. Not Jehoiakim, but by two other names. First of all, he's referred to as Jeconiah. J-E-C-O-N-I-A-H. Jeconiah. Jeremiah 24:1, 27:20, 28:4, 29:2. Jeconiah. Then he's referred to by a shortened form of that name. You just drop the first syllable and you've got Coniah. And he's referred to as Coniah in 22 verses 24 and 28 and 37:1. Sometimes you see him as Jehoiakim, sometimes it's Jeconiah, and sometimes it's Coniah. So we've got three names in the Bible. Then the last king is Zedekiah. We're giving you the name that you got on your chart. This is their most popular name. Doesn't mean this was their initial name, because it wasn't. His name was Mattaniah, and he had his name changed to Zedekiah. M-A-T-T-A-N-I-A-H. Now we're not going to get into looking at all of these passages and all these kings, because the period of the kings is the most difficult period in Old Testament history to understand. When you go back to the Pentateuch, all you've got is Moses to be concerned about, and a few other rather insignificant people in comparison to him. But when you get into the period of the monarchy from the 11th century to the 6th century B.C., and there you've got several hundred years of, 80 different kings, then it becomes very difficult to try to find out who is whose son and grandson, and when do you have the end and the beginning of a new dynasty, and when do you have a name change, and what's the right name of the right king. That's the whole lifetime study of just trying to get in your mind everything there is to know about the kings, which is what we're not going to try to do. But if we give you an outline of what's going on during the period of Jeremiah, it ought to help you in studying the book of Jeremiah so you won't confuse one king with another one. Amen. A reference for him is 2 Kings 24 and verse 17. The next political figure that's of importance is also found on your chart, and his name is Gedaliah, and he was placed as governor by Nebuchadnezzar in the ravaged land of Judea after 586. He then, of course, is assassinated by Ishmael, which we'll come across later on here in Jeremiah. A revolt time and time again. The reason why we've got to change from these kings here is because, of course, remember we've got three periods of captivity, 605, 597, 586. We've got three different dates where you've got Nebuchadnezzar coming over and doing something to the city, or doing something to the temple, or doing something to the people. And the underlying reason why we've got him coming over 3 times, Nebuchadnezzar, he wasn't like the Assyrians. The Assyrians were ruthless people. The Babylonians, and especially Nebuchadnezzar, was, and you read Daniel's book and you see, a little more civilized. Now, he's certainly an idolater, but at least he's a little more civilized than some of the Assyrian leaders, the Assyrian conquerors that had come into Israel and Judah. Because, you see, once he goes into Judea in 605, and we got the preliminary deportation of a small amount of the people there, then he sets up whoever he wants to be king and simply asks for tribute from them. And as long as they continue to pay the tribute to Nebuchadnezzar, he doesn't come back and doesn't bother. It's only when a lot of the false prophets that Jeremiah is prophesying against, as soon as they begin to get stirred up, and they begin prophesying to everyone, don't serve the king of Babylon. Or Hananiah comes along and says, there'll only be 2 more years, and we'll see the victory here. Then you begin to get people with a lot of false hopes, and then the king himself listens. He stops paying his tribute, and it costs him his life. Because Nebuchadnezzar comes back to Judea or back to Palestine, we've got another deportation of the people, and that's why we end up with these 3 different periods here. Now, what is important, what do you remember about the Battle of Carchemish? This is very important here. During this time, this Battle of Carchemish that I'll show you again on a map. Look over in 2 Kings chapter 23. And here's where we see some of these kings, some of these 4 kings that we've just mentioned appearing. What was the Battle of Carchemish? When Egypt fell to Babylon. Who was the Babylonian general and chief in control? Artaxerxes. Someone's 100 years or so in advance of it. Ezra? Did someone say Ezra? Please, no one could have. You couldn't have said that. Who's the general of the Babylonian forces? Evidently, you're just not thinking. I'm talking about who's the one doing the fighting here. Who's king? Nebuchadnezzar. Well, certainly. Nebuchadnezzar's the one who's doing the fighting. Now, I thought that was going to be the easy half of the question. That's who's leading the Babylonians in the Battle of Carchemish? Nebuchadnezzar. Who's leading the Egyptians? Pharaoh Necho. He's the one to remember. Now, he's Pharaoh during this whole period. He doesn't die now in the Battle of Carchemish. Of course, we see him end up back at Egypt. I think it's over in Jeremiah 46, where Jeremiah is prophesying against Egypt and prophesying against Pharaoh Necho. Now, of course, he loses a tremendous battle here at Carchemish, which was a city on the upper Euphrates River, a little bit northwest of Haran. Verse 29, we're in 2 Kings 23, verses 29 through 34. I don't believe in this passage it mentions Carchemish by name, but this is what he has reference to. It does over in, 2 Chronicles 35 and verse 20. I guess we'll turn there in a moment then. So we're looking at this battle here because this is what ends any hopes of the Egyptians of helping the Assyrians against the Babylonians, and it also does a lot to affect who's going to be king in Judah. Verse 29. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, this is speaking of Josiah, verse 28. In Josiah's days, Pharaoh Necho, generally you'll see this name spelled today, Necho. That's the accepted way to spell the name. King James spells it, I think, a couple of different ways, and neither one of them is Necho. But a CH, of course, in King James with a line under it pronounced like a C. That's, of course, the same as Chaldean. And if it ends with an H, that's really not pronounced, so in effect you've got Necho. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up, and remember we gave you it should be on behalf of. He's not fighting against Assyria, he's fighting on behalf of Assyria. So the word shouldn't be against here. That one word will throw off the whole account here. Yeah. It looks like you're ending up with Pharaoh Necho fighting against the Assyrians. And that's the one thing he's not doing. He's fighting on behalf of the Assyrians. Now, don't think that Egypt and Assyria, particularly like each other, but they would rather share the empires of the world than have Babylon conquer both of them and not share with anyone. So generally, if you've got a case like this, then they're going to choose the lesser of two evils. I'd rather have half the kingdom than none of the kingdom. But they're certainly not friends with the Assyrians. In his days, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up on behalf of the king of Assyria to Carchemish. He doesn't mention it, but that's where he's going, to the river Euphrates. And King Josiah went up against him, and he, this is Pharaoh Necho, slew him, Josiah, at Megiddo when he had seen him. And his servants carried him in a chariot dead from Megiddo and brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own sepulchre. The people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in his father's stead. So this is the first of these four kings we've mentioned. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign. He only reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. Down in verse 34, and Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, this is the same as Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, which makes him a brother of Shallum or Jehoahaz, king in the room of Josiah his father, and turned his name to Jehoiakim, and took Jehoahaz or Shallum away, and he came to Egypt and died there. So that's why Jehoahaz or Shallum is the first king of Judah to die in captivity or to die in exile. But it wasn't in one of the captive countries like Assyria or Babylon or Medo-Persia. It's in Egypt. Now in the passage in 2 Chronicles 35, we've got a conversation here between Pharaoh Necho and Josiah to help explain exactly what took place. If you will, turn that transparency on for a moment. I think of something I want to show you before I thought we would get there. Now, I think it's in Jeremiah 47:1 that it mentions that Pharaoh took the city of Gaza. The plain of Esdraelon, for the most part, is synonymous with the valley of Megiddo. Not completely, but we'll just assume that for a moment. Of course, we've got Carchemish way up here. Now, this is what happened. Of course, you've got Egypt down this way. Now, Pharaoh Necho is coming up this way. This is the only territory now. This 700 B.C., Israel has fallen to Assyria, and this is the remaining portion, very small territory now that belongs to Judah, the territory here in blue. So rather than go through the territory, Pharaoh Necho is, he's a good statesman. He skirts the territory of Judah. He's on his way up to Carchemish, and he goes up this way. He does take the city of Gaza on the way up. He goes all the way. He stays close to the coast to leave Judah alone. He gets up here to the plain of Megiddo, which is just what we've been reading about here. Josiah comes out from Jerusalem up here to fight him. He tells him to go home, but he persists in staying. And as a result, Josiah is grievously wounded. His servants take him back in his chariot, and Pharaoh Necho is now going to proceed on up to Carchemish, where he's going to lose the battle in 605. So that's the date of these portions of Scripture, 605. Okay, verse 20. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, then Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. But he sent ambassadors to him, saying, What have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against thee this day, but against the house wherewith I have war. For God commanded me to make haste. Forbear thee from meddling with God, who is with me, that he destroy thee not. Pretty interesting words from an Egyptian Pharaoh. He knew he had a mission. And he told God's righteous king, Josiah, don't bother me, or you'll end up dead. Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself, that he might fight with him, and hearken not unto the words of Necho from the mouth of God, and came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And the archer shot at King Josiah, and then he says that he's wounded. He goes back to Jerusalem where he dies. Verse 25, Jeremiah. See, he's mentioned here in the context. Jeremiah lamented for Josiah, and all the other professional men and women lamented for King Josiah. He's killed. Jehoahaz is set up. When Necho comes back, he takes Jehoahaz back to Egypt, sets up Eliakim, the same as Jehoiakim, and this is where we get our second of these 4 kings set up. That went by too fast. You've already got it down anyway. Now over in Jeremiah, we'll go ahead and look at Jeremiah chapter 46, the first 2 verses, because here we again have mentions of Pharaoh Necho and Carchemish. This, of course, begins a section of Jeremiah against the Gentile nations. You can turn that off for right now. The word of the Lord which came to Jeremiah the prophet against the Gentiles. And he begins here in verse 2, his first nation, against Egypt. Against the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates in Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon smote in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. Now you can go right back to your chart and find out when did Jehoiakim become king, and if it's in his 4th year, which would have been 605, the fighting of the Battle of Carchemish, then he became king in 609. That's just what you got on your chart. 609, Jehoiakim becomes king. Then, of course, after Jehoiakim, we come with our other king, Jehoiakim, and this is the one we see mentioned by the other 2 names so many times in Jeremiah. I don't believe we'll look up any of those passages. We'll come to those as we're looking throughout the book, or at least we'll pass by those as we're looking throughout the book. You can see where he appears. Now let's go back to chapter 25 of Jeremiah and pick up there and finish our book here this evening. The end of 2 Kings, the end of 2 Chronicles, the end of Jeremiah. You read and study all of those together, and you're getting the same account, but you're getting it in a full and complete form. If you take just one of those books and read the end of it, you don't have enough. But you read the end of 2 Kings, the end of 2 Chronicles, and the end of Jeremiah, and then you'll see where the various kings and the changes of their names come into play. They'll be found in all of those portions. Jeremiah 25, verses 11 and 12. This is what we stopped with last time. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolation. And we generally date this around 606, 605. Generally, you'll see those 2 dates stuck together, although it would probably be better to isolate 605. We know, of course, he attacked Judah and Jerusalem after Carchemish. You have the 2 dates together, but it's really in 605 that we have Nebuchadnezzar and his first expedition against Jerusalem and against Judah, because it's after he wins the Battle of Carchemish that he begins to descend from up here at Carchemish down through Israel, or what used to be Israel, down to Judah and Jerusalem, and the fight ensues from that. Okay, let's start with chapter 26 now, and finish the book. Chapter 26, he is, for no telling what time now, accused of seeking not the welfare, not the peace, but the harm of the city of Jerusalem, which is just what he was doing in his prophecy against the city because of their sins. And this is one of the many times that he's accused of those prophecies. Down in the beginning of verse 16, down through verse 19, we have a mentioning of Micah, who is the same Micah of our Bible, as you can tell from reading the first verse of the first chapter of Micah. And some of the princes are defending Jeremiah on the basis of the fact that earlier in the days of Hezekiah, Micah had also prophesied evil against that people and against that city, and no one did anything bad to him. In other words, Jeremiah, as he's going to set forth this principle 2 chapters later in chapter 28, is only following in line with the prophetic predictions that had been given before his time. Micah had prophesied of evil for an evil people. Jeremiah comes along prophesying evil again for an evil people. And it was because Micah had prophesied before him that Jeremiah is spared death at this time. Verse 18. Micah the Morasthite prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and spake to all the people of Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heath, and the mountain of the house as the high places of a forest. Did Hezekiah, king of Judah, and all Judah put him at all to death? Did he not fear the Lord and besought the Lord, and the Lord repented him of the evil which he had pronounced against him? Thus might we procure great evil against our souls. And then he goes on to talk about another prophet who escaped and who they did end up killing. So we have a link between the prophet Micah and the prophet Jeremiah, insofar as both of them are prophesying identical things, that Jerusalem is going to become heaps and mounds of rubble. And Jeremiah is spared on the basis of that. Chapter 27, for some reason, and it's hard to determine exactly why, the king referred to in the whole chapter is Zedekiah. So you see, we don't even have the capture of the city or anything. We're skipping ahead as far as our chronology is concerned when we get to chapter 27. For some reason, we've got a wrong name in the first verse. We've got Jehoiakim, which it appears that the name shouldn't be there because he's prophesying throughout the chapter to Zedekiah. Zedekiah is the one who appears time and time again. Of course, Jehoiakim or Zedekiah wouldn't be an actual son of Josiah, but he would be related to Josiah. So it appears that the name here, I don't know if you have a version. Anyone have a version where you've got Zedekiah rather than Jehoiakim in? I guess most of us had Jehoiakim. It appears that it should be Zedekiah. This is in chapter 27 in verse 1. I want to read a few verses again here, beginning with verse 6. Jeremiah's prophecy concerning Nebuchadnezzar and what not only his nation, but all nations in their response should be toward him. Now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field have I given him also to serve him. And all nations shall serve him, and his son, and his son's sons, which lets us know it's not a very long time period, about 70 years here, until the very time of his land come, that is, the time of the captivity of his land, and the restoration of Judah. And then many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of him. And it shall come to pass that the nation and kingdom which will not serve the same Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, that will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation will I punish, saith the Lord, with the sword and with the famine and with the pestilence, until I have consumed them by his hand. Therefore hearken not ye. This is what I said earlier. He has to come several times because all the false prophets arise and say what they think that the king should do, that he should rebel from Nebuchadnezzar and God would prosper. Your prophets, nor to your diviners, nor to your dreamers, nor to your enchanters, nor to your sorcerers, which speak unto you, saying, Ye shall not serve the king of Babylon. For they prophesy a lie unto you, to remove you far from your land, and that I should drive you out, and that ye should perish. In other words, Jeremiah is saying here in the end of verse 10 that although the false prophets don't realize what they're saying, the intent of their prophecies is the same as the intent of his prophecy, and that is to destroy the people. You see, he had prophesied destruction. They're prophesying, no, you won't be destroyed, but verse 10 says they're prophesying a lie to you, because if you obey what they say, then you'll be removed to a far land. I'll drive you out, and you should perish. So the same thing is going to be accomplished, whether it's the false prophets prophesying it or it's the true prophets, because God's going to make sure that all the people obey the false prophets. And therefore, they're going to fulfill the prophecy of Jeremiah, which says they're going to do this very thing. Now, we have a good example of this in chapter 28. Here we've got Hananiah, a false prophet, who's prophesying during the reign of Zedekiah. So we've already got a partial captivity. This would have to be after Zedekiah becomes king. We've already got a partial captivity of the people. So when he says down in verse 3 that within 2 full years I'll bring again into this place all the vessels of the Lord's house and so forth, that doesn't mean they'll only be in captivity 2 years, because they've already been there like 10 years already. So we're going to have, he said, we're only going to have an additional 2 more years. When Jeremiah says, no, you'll have 70, he means from the very beginning of captivity in 605 down to 586, which would be that amount of time. The chapter ought to be familiar to you. Jeremiah has had to get yokes of iron on his neck before to prove his point. Hananiah does the same thing, breaks them off to show that the yoke of Babylon will be broken, which simply, of course, doesn't come to pass. In chapter 29, we've got a letter, or at least part of a letter, that's written by Jeremiah to the captives who have already been taken over into Babylon.
For the continuation of this message,
in chapter 29, we've got a letter, or at least part of a letter, that's written by Jeremiah to the captives who have already been taken over into Babylon. And here we've got one of the first full promises of restoration. It was mentioned back in chapter 25. But in verses 10 through 14, we have a full promise of restoration for the people. You see in verse 1, these are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue of the elders which were carried away captives, and to the priests, and to the prophets, and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. Part of the apocryphal book of Baruch has the so-called letter of Jeremiah. Generally, they're not separated. It's together, and the letter of Jeremiah, again, is one of the apocryphal writings. Generally, it's included with the book of Baruch, but it's on the basis of the fact that here at least one time Jeremiah wrote a letter to the captives who were in captivity. And so a Jew later on wrote another letter, proposed it to be that of Jeremiah, which of course it wasn't, just like the book of Baruch wasn't written by Baruch, and a lot of the other books weren't written by the authors that they said they were. Verse 10, Thus saith the Lord, after 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, then I will visit you and perform my good word toward you in causing you to return to this place. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord. You see, this is a full promise of restoration. Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end. Then shall ye call upon me, and ye shall go and pray unto me, and I will hearken unto you. Daniel does that in chapter 9. He begins to set his face and pray to the Lord God of Israel. And Jeremiah had prophesied, you'll begin to pray to me, and then I'll hearken unto you. So Daniel started doing that. Ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. And I will be found of you, saith the Lord, and I will turn away your captivity. And I will gather you from all the nations and from all the places whither I have driven you, saith the Lord. And I will bring you again into the place whence I caused you to be carried away captive. Now, I mentioned earlier that Jeremiah, his book, contains very little messianic, millennial, end-time, day of the Lord, latter days, last day, predictive prophecy. The exception to that is chapters 30 through 33. For the most part, what we've got in chapters 30 through 33 are end-time prophecies of restoration. Notice that they follow the contemporary literal prophecy, the one that we just read there in chapter 29 of a literal restoration in 70 years. God, of course, knew that there would be future captivities and therefore the need of future returns of the exile and restoration in years to come, all the way down until our very day. And so this is what he's talking about here in chapter 30. This period is called the time of Jacob's trouble, which we know even goes beyond what we're seeing Israel accomplish today in their return to their land, because the time of Jacob's trouble, of course, is the period of tribulation, through which, for the most part, the Jews will have to go. Now, that's been prophesied ever since Deuteronomy, I believe, chapter 4. I don't know what all of your views are on end-time events and the tribulation and raptures and resurrections and judgments and crowns and rubies and rewards. But one thing you can be sure of is Israel, for the most part, is going through the tribulation period. Because that, again, is where she's going to see her need of God. Let's see where to begin here in chapter 30. It's mentioned there in verse 7, alas, that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Verse 8, it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him. And they shall serve the Lord their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord, neither be dismayed, O Israel. By the way, these prophecies you'll see refer to both Judah and Israel. He's not just talking to Judah now, because it's Judah and Israel who are going to need restoration in the last days. Which does away with the old theory that Herbert W. Armstrong's theory and several other people's theory that we are part of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That's the theory that you hear of a return and a restoration of Judah. That's Ezra, Nehemiah. But where do you ever find in the Bible that the 10 tribes that went into captivity in Assyria ever came back? You won't ever find it. So what happened to them? Well, you play around with the name Isaac and you end up with Anglo-Saxon. You play around with it long enough, you end up with Anglo-Saxons. You know, Isaac and Saxons. And of course the English, the British Isles, and the United States are Anglo-Saxon people. So if you wonder where Israel is, you're Israel, you see. That's, yeah, I guess it is, sister. That's where the church of our day, I guess, gets the notion that we are spiritual Israel today. Except, of course, they go a step further and say we are literal. By consanguinity, we are literal Israel today, which is simply not true. We'll deal with that when we deal with Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong and some of his problems. He's on every Sunday morning if you want to watch him read through his glasses and through his magnifying glass. That's right, he can't even see a piece of paper. He's got a magnifying glass and a pair of glasses to see. If that sounds like criticism, as I always says, that is criticism of him. For anyone to be teaching the Bible and have to read through glasses and a magnifying glass to be able to see it. But you got to watch him because he's very convincing, you know. They've worked up a whole theory. It's getting off the subject, but they've worked up a whole theory concerning when Jesus rose again from the dead. Was it on Saturday or was it on Sunday? And if you can get it back on Saturday, then you switch your commemoration of the Sabbath day from the first day back again to the last day of the week, which puts it back. We've got relatives. Of course, the headquarters are out in Pasadena, California. That's worldwide headquarters for the Worldwide Church of God in Pasadena. And we've got relatives that are caught up in that. And we never heard anything from them about anything concerning religion until my mother got the baptism of the Holy Spirit and sent them literature on the Holy Spirit in tongues and healings. And here came a package in the mail of I don't remember how many dozen books by them and their false cult. And, you know, they thought we were into religion. The Rosses had never been into religion before. So we were into religion. They were into religion, and they were excited and wanted to share with us about Worldwide Church of God. And all their various theories about Easter and baptism and just a lot of strange things. But they got a lot of proof texts for a lot of things. Because, well, just to leave you with one hint, remember that Jesus said that as Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights, then so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. But if he's crucified on Friday and he comes back on Sunday morning, you've only got 2 nights. You got your 3 days, part of them, but you've only got 2 nights there. So what are you going to do with that? You move the crucifixion back and you move the resurrection back, and you end up with your neat theory of Saturday being the Lord's day. And they've got scripture. That's one of them right there in Matthew chapter 12. What are you going to do with the fact he said, I'd be in the heart of the earth? And where is the heart of the earth anyway? I mean, the JDS people say he went to hell there. That's their proof text for saying he went to hell, because he went down to the very heart of the earth. And they, I guess, have read Jules Verne's story, Journey to the Center of the Earth. And they know it gets hot down there in the very middle. So that must be where the devil lives. It's amazing the impact that so many, well, not even religious, but so many religious stories, like so many of Dante's works and Milton's work, Paradise Lost, have had upon the theology of the church of our day. And Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, these science fiction movies and stories have had profound influence upon the church of our day. The prophecies of Nostradamus, which have been revived just in the last decade, and he's become famous. Hundreds of thousands of copies of his prophecies made back in, I think, the 16th or 15th century that allegedly are now being fulfilled today, and people are buying up the prophecies of Nostradamus like you wouldn't believe. He's a best-selling author, and he's been dead for 400 or 500 years now. You want to watch for his name, because it's very deceptive, some of his prophecies that he prophesied would take place in the last days. A lot of them look like they come to pass, but again, you see a lot of them haven't. And a false prophet can prophesy things that will come to pass sometimes, but a true prophet always is correct in his predictions. And that's how you want to distinguish the difference. Jeremiah is always right in what he's prophesying. Maybe Hananiah, he's called a prophet here in chapter 28, maybe Hananiah had prophesied several things right before. He had to, or why would he have been called the prophet then? But here he prophesies wrong, though. So you have to watch out for those that are prophesying things today. Well, back to our study here in Jeremiah. Jeremiah 30 through 33, end-time prophecies. We see here in 31 verse 1, at the same time, the time of the last verse of chapter 30, the latter days, saith the Lord, will I be the God of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people. So he's including Israel here in the prophecy with Judah. Verse 3 is the popular verse. The Lord hath appeared of old unto me, saying, Yea, I have loved thee with an everlasting love. Therefore with hesed, loving kindness, have I drawn thee. He's referring to the restoration in the latter days of Israel. All through these chapters, we've got prophecies of restoration. Beginning again here with, let's see, verse 31. Mentioned over in Hebrews 8 by Paul. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. This is restoration here. verses, let's see, we go over to chapter 33. Verse 1, we see that Jeremiah is getting these prophecies while he's in prison. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto Jeremiah the second time while he was yet shut up in the court of the prison, saying, Thus saith the Lord, the maker thereof, the Lord that formed it to establish it, the Lord is his name. Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not.
Hallelujah.
Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the houses of this city, and concerning the houses of the kings of Judah, which are thrown down by the mounts and by the sword. Verse 6, I'll bring health and cure, and I'll cure them, and will reveal unto them the abundance of peace and truth. Verse 15, And in those days and at that time will I cause the branch of righteousness to grow up unto David, and he shall execute judgment and righteousness in the land. In other words, this branch must be a he. In those days shall Judah be saved, and Jerusalem shall dwell safely. And this is the name wherewith ye shall be called, Yahweh Sidneku, the Lord our righteousness. And thus saith the Lord, David shall never lack a man to sit upon the throne of the house of Israel. Neither shall the priests the Levites lack a man before me to offer burnt offerings, and to kindle grain offerings, and to do sacrifice continually. And the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, saying, this is closing out here, his end-time prophecies. Thus saith the Lord, If ye can break my covenant of day and my covenant of night, that there should not be day and night in their season, then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, that he should not have a son to reign upon his throne, and with the Levites the priests my ministers. As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, then so will I multiply the seed of David my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, saying, Considerest thou not what this people hath spoken, saying, The two families which the Lord hath chosen, that's Israel and Judah, he hath even cast them off. Thus they have despised my people, that they should be no more a nation before them. Thus saith the Lord, If my covenant be not with day and night, and if I have not appointed the ordinances of heaven and earth, then will I cast away the seed of Jacob, and David my servant, so that I will not take any of his seed to be rulers over the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for I will cause their captivity to return, and have mercy on them. You see, the Mosaic covenant was not an eternal covenant, was not a perpetual, everlasting one that characterized the Davidic covenant as you see here in verse 21. That's why under the Mosaic covenant, after the time of Moses, they continually had to what we call renew the covenant. And there'd be a certain time, like under Joshua in Joshua chapter 8 and in Joshua chapter 24, where there would be a renewal of the covenant. With Josiah in 622 B.C., after the discovery of the book of the law, we've got a renewal of the covenant. And if you keep having to renew it like that, it means it's not an everlasting covenant. But the covenant that he made with David, which is found back in 2 Samuel chapter 7, was an eternal and perpetual covenant, because it was established not upon a lot of laws and precepts, but it was established upon one thing, and that was the messianic seed that would come forth, that would branch out, in other words, from the root and the stem of Jesse and from the loins of King David. Therefore, we've got an eternal covenant made with him that's only to be realized in the millennial reign and rule of the Lord Jesus Christ, along with his servant David and along with all those spiritual Davids. Revelation chapter 1, those kings and priests that will live in the last day. Chapter 36 of the book. We're not going to look at any verses because we've looked at this recently in the last few months and several other occasions, but it's interesting because we have so much material here concerning the writing down of Jeremiah's prophecies by Baruch. And remember, after he gets them written down the first time, the king destroys the prophecies and he has to write them down and add more words to that prophecy. And this is what you're given throughout chapter 36. In chapter 37 and 38, we've got many of his experiences while he's in prison. All for the simple reason that he's prophesying the truth about the people. Remember, an open rebuke is better than secret love. And it might hurt, but at least it's truth. And in the final analysis, the truth is the only thing that'll stand. So they should have listened to what Jeremiah had said, although it might not have been pleasant. It humbled one's national pride to not even put up a fight against Nebuchadnezzar. We at least ought to be able to fight against him rather than just lay down our arms and surrender, which is what we've got in chapter 39. Chapter 39 is the actual account, along with chapter 52 and along with the ends of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, of the taking of the city. Now, it actually took a year and a half for Nebuchadnezzar to take the city. He came over in the 9th year, I believe in the 10th month of the reign of Zedekiah, which would have been in 588 B.C. And it took him until the 11th year and the 4th month, when famine actually had set upon the city. The wall was broken up, 586, and you got a fall of the city. Verse 1. In the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, in the 10th month, so this is 588 B.C., came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all his army against Jerusalem, and they besieged it. And in the 11th year of Zedekiah, in the 4th month, the 9th day of the month, which is the where they hold the Feast of Ab here, because you got the fall of the city on this particular day here of the 4th month, the 9th day, the city was broken up. Zedekiah, verse 4, tries to flee. Verse 5, the Chaldeans catch him and put out his eyes, which helps to reconcile the prophecies of both Jeremiah and Ezekiel, where one had said that he would go to Babylon, and the other had said he would not see the land of his captivity. And so it appears like one prophecy saying you will go into captivity, and the other one saying you won't. But he does go, but he's blind when he goes. So both prophecies are able to be fulfilled in. Verse 10, this is the captain. Nebuchadnezzar is the general and the king, but the captain of his army is Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, left of the poor people, which had nothing in the land of Judah, and gave them vineyards and fields at the same time. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, gave charge concerning Jeremiah to Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, saying, Take him and look well to him, do him no harm, but do unto him even as he shall say unto thee. So we've got the final fall of the city here. Jeremiah is going to be allowed to stay. Now, if you'll turn back to chapter 34 and verse 7, if you'll turn the transparency on again, we'll show you what actually takes place. Now, in chapter 39, you see you've got the attack of the city in 588. A year and a half later, around a year and a half later, 586, you've got the fall of the city. Notice way back here in chapter 34, this is during the same period as chapter 39. But you see they're separated by various number of chapters here, but it's during the same period. Verse 7 is what we want. There are only 3 cities in Judah which are still standing here at this time. And this is in the very beginning of the year 586. Then the king of Babylon's army fought against Jerusalem and against all the cities of Judah that were left, against Lachish and against Azekah, for these defense cities remained of the cities of Judah. All right, you can see the territory right here of Judah. Here you've got Jerusalem. That's going to be the last city to fall, the last and the great city to fall. Here you've got Lachish, where the letters of Lachish, the ostraka of Lachish, were discovered. What's the name of the other place? Azekah. Azekah is not on here. Azekah is right in between Jerusalem and Lachish. And of course, remember when we studied the ostraka of Lachish, it was between the outposts that were on the outside of Lachish and Azekah, where I believe it was Azekah whose fires had gone out first. So you'd end up with Jerusalem and Lachish as the last 2 cities, because the back in, I think, chapter 6 and verse 1 of Jeremiah, the signal fires had gone out at Ezekiel. Now what we've got, after Nebuchadnezzar now has fought up here at Carchemish, he descends this way. Cities in this area, of course, don't need to be taken because they've already been taken by Syria hundreds of years before. And you've got other people who've been brought in to repopulate the area, which of course is where you get your Samaritan people. And of course, Jerusalem is going to be the hardest one to take, so you wonder why Lachish is mentioned way down here when he comes from this way. Well, he simply comes around and surrounds Jerusalem and takes all these other cities that need to be taken. And two that happen to be well fortified, especially Lachish, were Lachish and Ezekiel. And so we end up with Lachish, Ezekiel, which is located right around in this territory, and Jerusalem as the three last cities. Jerusalem is the most fortified, Lachish second, Ezekiel third. That's why Nebuchadnezzar breaks in between the two, takes evidently, we can determine from the Lachish letters, Ezekiel first. Then he takes Lachish, and then it's the 9th day of the 4th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah that the wall of Jerusalem is actually broken. And this is what chapter 39 of Jeremiah and chapter 52 are talking about. Okay, back to chapter 39. The fall of the city. Chapter 40 is talking about the same thing. Chapter 41 is where we have Gedaliah, the governor that Nebuchadnezzar left behind in the land, assassinated by Ishmael. Now, he's not related or not the same Ishmael of Abraham's time. If you will, put this on there to show you what the reign of, you have to put that on there sideways, of Babylon looked like, their control of the world at this time. Yeah, I believe that's the way it goes on there. That's good enough. Just give us this general territory here. Okay, you see what you got Egypt pushed all the way back down into Egypt. They're trying to go up. You see that one up? They're trying to. They had tried to go up. Here's Carchemish, by the way, up here. You got to tilt that if you want it to go higher. There you go. I don't mean to be in your way all the way over there. I really don't know where to stand so everyone can see it. Maybe you can look in the mirror and it will reflect it. Okay, here's Babylon. This whole territory, notice no one ever wants to conquer this territory. It's desert. And you see how this is shaped. If you draw an outline of this, you get a crescent. And that's why Mesopotamia is known as the Fertile Crescent. Because you got the two rivers of Tigris and Euphrates flowing here. And you've got Mount Hermon with its snow-capped peaks draining water down, and it forms the headwaters of the Jordan as they flow through the Lake Chinnereth on down Jordan River down into the Dead Sea. This is a Fertile Crescent. This is what Babylon takes. Notice at the same time we've got this huge Median Empire up to the northeast of Babylon. And of course the Medes and the Persians are the very people who are going to take Babylon. We don't get to that in this book, but we get to it in later books. Babylon at that time wasn't strong enough to take the Median Empire. Egypt still got its little control of the Egyptian province and of the Nile River Valley. So that's what Babylon looks like. You see they take all of Palestine, they control all of Aram, and all of what today is Iran and Iraq. Okay, chapters 42 through 43. We have the flight of Ishmael, because he had assassinated Gedaliah, and the other people that were with him, along with Jeremiah and Baruch. Of course, they went unwillingly down into Egypt. Chapters 42 through 43. Chapters 46 through 51 are the prophecies against the foreign nations. We're not going to even look at that, but I'm going to list the nations that are prophesied against, or the cities, whichever the case might be. First of all, Egypt, chapter 46. The Philistines, chapter 47. Moab, chapter 48. Ammon, 49, verse 1 through verse 6. Edom, 49, 7 through 22. Damascus, 49, 23 through 27. Kedar, 49, 28 through 33. Elam, 49, 34 through 39. And then we've got, I believe, 2 whole chapters, 50 and 51, which are long chapters, are against Babylon. He saved the best for last, or the worst for last, however you want to look at it. 2 long chapters. And then chapter 52 is a historical appendix to the book, which reads like chapter 39, the fall of the city. Always remember, when you get to the end of Jeremiah, you think when you get to chapter 50 that you're almost through. But chapters 50 and 51 are long chapters, so it takes you a while to get through, even though you're on practically the next to last chapter. I was deceived when I first started reading Jeremiah. I thought I was through, and I kept reading, and 50 and 51 are so long. 52 historical appendix, and that closes Jeremiah.
For a